Another year where how good is Tua Tagovailoa is at the top of Miami Dolphin fans' minds and certainly NFL fans' minds. Well, that was a question posed by Ryan Clark this week when he called out Tua's exercise routine, his exercise habits, despite the apology from Ryan Clark later this week, still led to an interesting back and forth between the two. We had a little bit of Will Smith, get your name out of my mouth, coming from Tua in a press conference. Zach, as a Patriots fan, how do you look at this Miami Dolphins team? How do you view Tua as Vegas has it? They're currently projected to be a better team coming out of the AFC East this year, which is something you haven't had to say a lot over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I would say specifically for this year, that Dolphins team ceiling is the Super Bowl. Looking at what Tua was last year, was a quarterback that was doing the job well enough to produce wins. And especially where you have Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill on both sides of the ball there, and potential to get in a guy like Jonathan Taylor, where your running back room has been a conundrum for the last 10 plus years. Yeah, they're a threat. They're a real threat coming out of the AFC East and the AFC conference in general. Yeah, I view them as a threat.
The Dolphins are in a very interesting position, and I agree with you on the team being really good. Their defense should be much improved, which ironically, that was the flip this last year, right? It used to be like the Dolphins had this top defense with Xavier Howard and Christian Wilkins, and they were a top 10 defense, but they just couldn't score points. And then the flip side was they had a top 10 offense for the first time since 1995, which is a real stat. They had not had a top 10 scoring offense since 1995. They were a top 10 scoring offense, but their defense couldn't stop anyone to save their lives. And then at the end of the season, Tua got concussed and they made the playoffs, but it didn't matter because they lost to the Packers on Christmas, which that was a really bad game by Tua, but I'm willing to kind of suspend belief on that because he was probably concussed and they just kind of played him through that game. But at the same time, my whole philosophy on Tua is please ask me again at the end of the season. I wouldn't feel comfortable giving him a long-term contract extension, which is what the Dolphins didn't do this offseason. He's going into his fourth season and doesn't have a long-term extension, which there's not a whole lot of cases for player who gets the fifth-year option accepted but doesn't get a long-term contract at the end of the third year. There's cases where the fifth-year option gets declined, like I know that happened for Jameis Winston, for Marcus Mariota, Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones being the one person of that group that ended up getting the long-term extension. There's the whole weird situation with Baker Mayfield where he got the fifth-year option picked up, but then didn't end up playing on the team for his fifth year. So there's not a whole lot of precedent for a team picking up the fifth-year option and not extending the quarterback long-term. So we're kind of in uncharted territory with Tua in that respect. If we're trying to picture what does Tua look like compared to other past quarterbacks in the league. And my whole philosophy on his play is just please ask me again at the end of the season. I don't know how good he is. I know he's good enough to merit being a starting quarterback in the NFL. We saw that the first roughly 3 games of last year and 4 games after he came back from the first concussion. And so we've seen that he's capable of being a starting quarterback in the NFL. We've seen that having one of the 3 best receivers in the NFL on your team makes a quarterback go from looking very poor to a league average quarterback for much of the season. So yeah, Tyreek Hill coming to the team makes a big difference, but I don't know how good or bad Tua is at this point. Please ask me again once I have a larger sample size.
Well, I tell you one thing that Tua is for sure going to need. He's going to need a healthy Teron Armstead to be there, because we know when Armstead kind of missed some time with injuries last year, that was also a detriment to Tua on the field. And right now he's hoping for a week 1 return, but he's currently dealing with a leg injury. So who knows? That's kind of up in the air. We know anytime the Dolphins have had injuries on the offensive line, that has spelled disaster for Tua in his young NFL career. He's unfortunately a guy that hasn't been able to stay healthy. So I know that Ryan Clark, again, since apologized for his comments on Tua, but I do think it does bring up the very real discussion of Tua's ability to kind of stay around in the NFL, because health has been one of his biggest knocks, right? We can all agree that health has been the biggest thing that has plagued Tua in his career. So it's kind of on him also to be at utmost peak physical ability, mostly just to protect himself almost, because if he's taking hits, if he's getting thrown around like a rag doll, then that's going to shorten his NFL career there. And that's going to let these questions continue to linger. He needs 1 season where he can stay healthy from start to finish. And I think that would honestly put a lot of questions to bed on Tua. If he can stay healthy on an NFL field for all 17 games, I feel like that's going to take away one of at least the biggest knocks Whether that sticks around for the rest of his NFL career or not, we don't have a crystal ball here to be able to answer that question for sure. But at least if I'm an NFL executive right now and I'm saying, man, Tua, that guy just can't stay on the field to save his life, then I would say that would probably be one of the biggest things that would cause me pause whenever I'm thinking about giving him an NFL extension. And certainly when I think about like his future, it looks like the type of player you would franchise tag. What do you think the importance of health is for Tua moving forward?
I mean, for him, it's everything. I mean, we as NFL fans sat and watched what happened to him last season on multiple occasions, down and out, could not play the rest of the season, very injured, obviously with head trauma. I mean, just watching that Bengals game, you want to look away, but you can't stop watching because it's so bad. So I mean, it's everything. It's everything for Tua. He needs to be able to keep his head on his shoulders. And I know that Mike McDaniels was doing something with having the camera in his blind spot and kind of watching what Tua sees on the field, and we had that all in OTAs. That is the kind of stuff that he has to do now in order to just stay afloat. He is starting a lot slower than these other quarterbacks that haven't had that injury history so far.
Tank for Tua was a popular buzz phrase that was thrown around because I think a lot of people looked at Tua, the prospect, and thought he had potential to be a top 10 quarterback. When you look at the current landscape of the NFL, do you think that Tua still has that ability within him?
Feel pretty certain, and I said this last year, that we know what Tua is not. Tua is not Joe Burrow. Tua is probably not Justin Herbert. So at this point, we're kind of operating within that space of like the second tier, third tier, fourth tier starting quarterbacks in the NFL in terms of what his ceiling could end up being. And ultimately, I think a lot of that success, as we've seen from the Kirk Cousins and the Ryan Tannehills, even at times the players on the upper echelon, like the Aaron Rodgers or the Dak Prescotts or even the Tom Brady's at the end of the day, was the team that you put around the player is ultimately going to determine how well or poorly the player ends up performing. And maybe that's where Tua ends up occupying, is the space where I remember with Derek Carr for years, we saw when they tore the team down, Carr was like 28th in passer rating. And then when they put a support around him, he almost won an MVP. So it's like sometimes the player keeps the boat steady and is as good or bad as the team that you put around him, which makes sense why the Dolphins have gone all in the past couple of years, right? Is this idea that, yes, we're going to give up a first round pick for Tyreek Hill. Yes, we're going to trade down in the draft with the bonus pick we got in Laramie Tunsil trades that the Niners can go up and get Trey Lance, but then we're going to trade 2 first-round picks for Jalen Waddle, essentially, because they traded from 12 to 6, and they had to give up an extra first-round pick to make that happen. So we're going to give 2 first-round picks for Jalen Waddle. We're going to trade a first-round pick for Tyreek Hill. We're going to trade a first-round pick for Bradley Chubb. They want to trade a day 2 pick for Jonathan Taylor right now. They are eager to trade for Jonathan Taylor. The Colts' asking price is just too high right now. So, I mean, they went out and traded for Jalen Ramsey this offseason. Like, they are in a position where they are trying to put as much of a support around Tua as they possibly can, because that will give them the best sample size on whether or not to extend Tua or go down the Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins path of franchise tag 1 year, franchise tag a second year. Then we have to make a decision about whether to keep him or let him walk into free agency, whether they go down that path and the conversation changes from Tua, how good or bad is he, to Tua long-term extension or not long-term extension, which surprisingly, we didn't get there, given that he's been eligible for an extension for about 6 months now, I think. Whenever the new league year started in March is when Tua's been eligible for an extension, but the Dolphins have waited and watched, and they are going to have him under contract for at least 2 more years, and they're going to use those 2 years to figure out whether or not they want to commit to him being the $40 million quarterback, or maybe $50 million quarterback at the rate it's going, $50 million quarterback long-term in Miami, and what that means for their roster construction.
Zach, how do you look at the Dolphins in this AFC East? Like, how do you think they rank against the Bills, the Jets, and even your Patriots?
I can tell you without a doubt against the Patriots. The Patriots have never been a surefire bet against the Dolphins regular season, even when Tom Brady was around. It was the team that they struggled with the most in the division. I put a lot of weight into that when I look at how everything is now and the landscape of the league is now. The Dolphins should, for all intents and purposes, sweep the Patriots this season. As far as the AFC goes, I'm putting them anywhere between 2 and 5. I think that they're making the playoffs. They have a legitimate shot to knock off the Bills for the division. They really do. I think the Bills are going to take a huge step back this season. And obviously, I think that they're going to be probably anywhere from 5 or 6 in that wild card spot. I don't think they just make it. I think that they are a legitimate threat this season. I think Tua does maintain health this season. I think that they've been doing a lot to try and keep him on the field.
Hey guys, we want to give a big shout out to Zack Burl for joining us on this episode. Zack's one of the outstanding hosts of the Boda Sports Podcast. Those guys do a great job of covering the NFL and fantasy football. Give them a listen. Find links to their stuff in our YouTube description below. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe on our stuff as well. From Juju, stay safe, happy, and healthy, and we'll see you on the next one.